Merong mga tao na alam natin, no, may mga kriminal.
An international human rights organization is telling President Bongbong Marcos not to go the way of his predecessor. At the same time, Filipino Americans tired of being targets of hate. These are calls to stop crimes against ordinary people. And we listen to them in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. Online are Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and in a little while, Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5. Ami, happy weekend.
Hi, happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Anong top story mo today?
Very happy. Sabi ng Okta, nagwa-warning. Nagtataka daw sila kung bakit umaakyat na naman ng COVID. Ayan, na-COVID na si
Bautista.
Jimmy Bautista, na-COVID.
NCR
And
positivity
even
rate
in
at
the US,
14%.
no, si Joe Biden, na-COVID.
Yeah.
Delikado.
Yeah, but have we been able to look at hospital utilization kung significant ang pagtaas o wala pa naman?
Wala pa naman. Yung positivity rate lang ang inaalala ng Okta. Saka hindi nga daw nila malaman what is driving the increase. Yan, hindi malaman. So, ingat-ingat na lang during the weekend.
Yeah. Although in the past kasi, they've been also saying na it could be the new sub-variants that are all over the place anyway.
Yun na nga, sub-variant daw. Pero yun na nga. Sabi nga nila, it's immune evasive. Kaya dagdag na ingat na lang.
And at the same time, all these reports of, all these reports concerning the Executive Secretary, Attorney Vic Rodriguez.
Yes. Chismis lang daw yan. Marites kasi, no?
Oh. So,
Hindi totoo.
Ikaw, marami kang kilala sa Malacanang from way back. Anong narinig mo?
Wala naman eh. It's just officially ngayon, dinideny niya.
Yeah.
Nag-call sa kanya yung Malacanang press corps.
But
Ikaw ba, naririnig ba ninyo? Ayan, Marites kayo.
hindi, nagtanong ako sa iyo, ikaw sumagot. Kaya ako nagtatanong.
Wala naman kaming ganun. Dinahayan lang kami.
Yeah, we also carried the denial. Actually, we carried a voiceover from the side of Attorney Vic Rodriguez about the issue. But the fact is that lumitaw bigla ito. Just barely a month into that new administration.
Abangan na lang ang susunod na kabanata. At lahat naman ngayon, ang inaaban ngayon is SONA eh.
Yes,
Just 3 days
certainly.
away.
The first
Yes.
SONA of the president, of course, almost always man, there's nothing more important to listen to and watch than the first and the last SONAs of a president.
At siya daw mismo ang nagsusulat ng sarili niyang speech.
Okay.
So that would be interesting.
With that segue from Ana Marie Pamintuan, let's bring in our first guest for tonight. An international rights group is calling on the president to undo the, and we quote, rampant violations during the Duterte administration. And to talk more about this, we have with us Human Rights Watch senior researcher Kaloy Conde. Kaloy, welcome back to the Chiefs.
Good evening.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me, Ed, and Mamami. Magandang gabi sa inyo.
Well, thank you for joining us. Kaloy, let me start off with this. Of course, we also do want to talk about Marcos vis-a-vis the previous administration. But let me start off with this, with something more proximate to today, which is the coming SONA on Monday. Are you expecting Bongbong Marcos, the president, to talk in any way about human rights or the war on drugs or anything along those lines? We do know that Duterte always liked to talk about human rights, but not in a positive way during his SONAs.
Yes. Yes. Well, if he's, how many weeks in office is any indication, he hasn't shown any inclination to talk about human rights at all. No, so that's quite to us medyo troubling sa amin yan. So in a way, we don't really, we would be pleasantly surprised if he tackled human rights on Monday in his SONA. But we also are very, very hopeful na he will. No, because the fact is that he cannot wish these problems away. He cannot look past this, and hindi niya pwedeng i-ignore lang itong mga nangyari na past 6 years in terms of human rights. These are things that happened in the previous administration that he inherited. So he will have to grapple with this. And so we're hoping that he will be clear-eyed about this and make sure to at least lay out outline a road of a path to I would say a better human rights situation in the country.
Pero kahit hindi directly human rights pero for example the war on drugs and whether or not rights of suspects have any value. I mean, di ba? Usually tangential naman yung pagkakabanggit ng Pangulong Duterte dati sa human rights. Bigla na lang niya ipapasok while talking about the drug problem. Would you expect or are you hoping that the president would at least talk about something like that, yung war on drugs and what would happen this time?
Well, definitely, we hope that he will tackle this, and we hope he will give a directive to the PNP, for instance. To one, our best hope would be for him to say that the war on drugs, as it is being enforced right now, or in the past 6 years, has ended under his watch. That would be the best scenario for us. And if not, then the least he can do is order the police to really be more rights respecting in the conduct of the anti-drug campaign. It doesn't have to be, as you said, specific about human rights, but the civil liberties, due process, they're very, very important in tackling crime, in tackling these problems. So I hope he realizes that and adverts to that in his zona, because that is very important. If he stays silent about the drug war in terms of how the police should be doing this, in a more rights-respecting manner, then that would be really, really worrisome.
Pero on the other hand, Kaloy, sabi naman ng iba, the fact na hindi niya minention at all in his inaugural speech yung war on drugs, it's not a priority for him. Yun naman ang reading ng iba na, I mean, are you reading too much into it? Is that too much of a positive take into this kind of outlook? Parang hindi high sa kanya yung agenda na yun, di ba?
Well, we certainly understand that, where he's coming from, that the drug war is not his agenda. It's not as if he was like President Duterte before, who went into his office with guns blazing, literally. I mean, he never promised that kind of thing, when he became president. But at the same time, while we understand the politics of it, that the country has several other problems that he has to grapple with: the economy, inflation, gas prices, and joblessness and poverty. The fact is that these human rights problems have persisted for decades, and some of them you can trace back to the dictatorship of his father. So really, it should be on his plate. It should be on his table. So he has to really deal with that.
And sabi nga din nila, it's significant daw kasi we all know that President Duterte, until I think his final day in office, he was talking about, he kept yun lang ang kanyang bilin sa kanyang successor, right? He kept reminding the incoming president, please pursue the war on drugs. Are we reading too much into this na magbabago na ito under the administration?
Well, that's one way to read it, Mamami, na baka dahil he doesn't, advert to it, he doesn't mention it, baka nga naman he just doesn't care about it, and to some degree that's good. But, these are two different presidents. Mr. Duterte has had the war on drugs as his main, battle cry, and he benefited politically from that. He became so extremely popular because of that. And Mr. Marcos, we're still trying to figure out what he wants to do in the coming 6 years. Certainly, he hasn't said anything about the war on drugs. I mean, he hasn't said anything, that would suggest that magwo-worsen yung mga killings and all that. But, so we're still all waiting. Although there are indications sa actions ng mga kanyang or sa panalita ng mga kabinete niya na mukhang business as usual. But again, think of it this way. We've been monitoring the news since he became president. And in a way, this is good. Wala halos drug war killings na nare-report sa media ng mga police, which is so different from all the past monitorings that we're doing. So does that indicate that the war on drugs, as it had been enforced, is no longer the case? That's still too early to say. So while some people cannot be faulted na sasabihin na ng, we should give Mr. Marcos the benefit of the doubt, he really needs to outline a clear policy on human rights, and particularly the war on drugs.
But at the same time, a lot of the activities on the war on drugs during the Duterte administration were driven by the rhetoric of the president himself. His speeches, his proclamations, his press conferences, and how he would word his point of view with regard to drugs, criminals, and human rights. Now, if there is no mention at all by the president in his SONA or in the next few weeks about the war on drugs or human rights, how do you think that would change things on the ground, if at all? Kung walang imik, walang sinabi, walang paramdam ang Pangulo sa issues ng human rights, war on drugs and all that, ano kaya epekto nito sa human rights issues at sa war on drugs?
Well, you can look at it as parang, because as you pointed out, Ed, the police during the Duterte administration took their cue from his rhetoric. So, there's enough evidence to suggest that the violent rhetoric of President Duterte drove the war on drugs in many ways. So you can interpret the silence of Mr. Marcos as a sign that maybe they're not too interested, or maybe this is really not on top of their priorities. And to some degree, that's good, But then again, that raises the question. So if it's not his priority, prosecute the war on drugs as it had been done by Mr. Duterte, what about accountability? Magiging tahimik din ba siya in terms of going after those who were complicit in the human rights violations related to the drug war? For instance, the police officers, the police lieutenants, all of these people who, in one way or another, were responsible for the violence and the human rights abuses. So, again, he can not mention the drug war or any of this during his SONA, but at some point in his presidency, he will have he will be forced to tackle this because may question pa ng accountability. And if the ICC, the International Criminal Court, ay patuloy na mag-iingay about the investigation of Duterte, wala talagang choice si Mr. Marcos but to respond to this. And really, the public, not just the human rights community, the public deserves, a specific and clear policy on this from Mr. Marcos.
Kaloy, we're joined by Lucy Cruz Valdez, the head of News 5. Happy weekend, Lucy.
Hello, yeah. Hi,
Lucy.
Lloyd. Hi, Ami. Yeah, I don't know if this has been asked already, Carlos, no? But ako ang question ko na lang sa'yo is just moving forward, what do you expect the president to actually do in regard to human rights, knowing that he himself is actually carrying some kind of baggage, not some kind, but a heavy baggage in regard to human rights violations?
Let's, Lucia, that's a good question. And let's cut him some slack, okay? He's just into 3 weeks in office. And let's not even factor in the baggage that you mentioned about human rights. Let's just look at this moving forward. One thing that he can do is really, stop the drug war as it is being enforced right now. Stop the violence in the drug war. And if ever na magkakaroon pa ng mga drug raid, make sure that due process is being followed. And really cooperate with authorities in terms of investigating the human rights violations related to the drug war that had happened before. Because that may have happened under Duterte, but he inherited that. That is his responsibility. And moving forward on the argument on the point about what he can do, one, he really needs to release Laila de Lima. He really needs to give a directive to the DOJ or whoever to drop the charges against Senator Laila de Lima, because that has been proven to be bogus. That will be a clear indication of how serious he is in terms of human rights. And finally, just on this, I don't want to take up time, but really appoint members of the new Commission on Human Rights who are independent-minded, who are known to be really proponents of upholding human rights in the past, who have a track record of being transparent as well. So he needs to do that. Kasi hangga't hindi niya ma-appoint ang bagong Commission on Human Rights na with people na even the human rights community can trust, has credibility, ano pa rin, in the dark pa rin ang taong bayan about what he intends to do as far as human rights is concerned.
Sundutin ko na lang yan. I can't ask you who you think should be appointed as Human Rights Commissioner, but I can ask you who would you or what kind of a person would you not want to see appointed sa CHR?
Well, definitely, Ed. I mean, we would want somebody who is not, well, let me put it this way: who is somebody who should be cognizant of the human rights problems that we've seen. He has to be somebody. He or she has to be. They have to be somebody na meron track record nga on human rights. Advocacy. And the human rights community need to vet them. They need to be included in all of this. It cannot be commissioners who are known to be apologists as far as human rights. They cannot be people who have shown in the past to neglect the human rights concerns that have been raised in the past how many years, and also they have to be members of the commission who are really willing to do the task and who are really willing to ensure that this administration is true to its human rights commitment. Because keep in mind, Ed, the government, whether sino man ang presidente niyan, they have commitments. Human rights commitment to the international community, to the UN Human Rights Council, to the EU, and to the general public. They have that commitment, and they have to uphold that. And so we need people in the Human Rights Commission who can do that.
Lloyd, there's a story today, no? Sabi ng Department of Justice, it's collating data about the war on drugs of the previous administration. What do you think of that? Malayo ba mararating yan, or ano lang siya, palabas lang siya?
Well, alam mo, Ami, the war on drugs, 6 years na ginawa nila ito, and hanggang ngayon, they're still saying na nagko-collate pa sila ng data. And that's not very encouraging, because that's exactly the kind of action that the UN Human Rights Council and even the international community wanted the Philippine government to do, to provide them data from the police, mainly about the cases in the war on drugs. And so far, they have failed to do that. And in fact, just to contextualize this, the International Criminal Court prosecutor actually deferred its investigation of President Duterte and the war on drugs because the Philippine government said that they have been trying to investigate several of these cases, and that they're going to demonstrate that the court system and the justice system in the Philippines works. But now, a few weeks ago, the ICC prosecutor said that the government failed to come up with its to make good on that promise. And that basically saying na he didn't use the word niloko, but parang na-mislead ang ICC ng Philippine government. So, walang intensyon na ipakita na ng Philippine government. They don't have the intention really to even collate data or to transfer or to give the international investigators data on the war on drugs. And that's a very huge problem, because then kung wala tayong data, kung wala tayong mga statistics or datos na ganyan, how can we have accountability? So malayong mangyari yun.
Eloy, what will you say to critics who will say that right now the overwhelming concern is really about our economy, our food security, talagang gut issues? And so to expect the government to prioritize a drug war that was waged in a previous administration, it is asking a bit too much. And in effect, you're asking them to concentrate on something that is direly needed in the here and now.
Well, that's a fair question, Lucy, and I'm glad you asked that. Look, we're not asking Mr. Marcos to prioritize, human rights, because let's be realistic. As you said, there are other issues that the country faces that he inherited, and these issues on poverty, on joblessness, on the economy, on whether saan ba sila kakain, ang liit na ng pandesal, ang taas-taas ng presyo ng gas, although kahit may rollback, ganun pa rin. These are real issues, but they should not cancel out the concerns on human rights. This is not kind of a zero-sum game, na tipong one should be one should be eliminated in favor of the other. No, this government, is big enough to handle many of these problems. They have the Commission on Human Rights to tackle the human rights issues. They have the Department of Justice to tackle accountability. Even the Malacanang itself, they have the Presidential Committee on Human Rights. If they're really serious about human rights, they can make use of all of this. And there are many more agencies in government that can, do things to improve the human rights conditions. In the police, there's the Human Rights Office of the Police. In the military, there's the Human Rights Office of the military. If only Mr. Marcos can issue a directive telling these offices, look, guys, all this sordidness in the past 6 years, all that is over. Let's be more respectful of human rights. Let's do things the right way. I think that will go a long way. And then, of course, you have civil society. You have the UN. You have the EU that are willing to help in terms of improving human rights in the country. Not only that, they're willing to help in the economy, in alleviating poverty. So there's this multifarious ways of attacking the many problems that we have. So hindi siya tipong isang task lang na kailangan mag-multitask ng gobyerno nito. That's just the reality of it.
Well, as a follow-up to that question, defenders of the war on drugs and Mr. Duterte himself are pointing to his retirement numbers, no? It's really high, the highest among all the presidents since polling started at 70, napakataas nun. And they're saying it's an indication of support for his unorthodox methods of fighting criminality. What do you think of that? Wala bang interest ang Pilipino sa human rights? I mean, it's not high on the national consciousness na dapat ganito ginagawa if you're going to catch the drug traffickers, or they just actually want that kind dahil they're frustrated with the system of justice na sinasabi ng iba na ano pang gagawin natin, mabuti ba yan, mabilis eh. Yung troublemaker, wala ka agad.
Well, I don't think Filipinos, I don't think that they don't care about human rights. I mean, they care about other things, obviously, and that, they care about, safety, public safety. They care about criminality and all of that. And, their leaders. Ito kasi ang nangyayari in the past 6 years. Their leaders made them, bombarded them with all kinds of rhetoric, telling them that, if you want this country to prosper, you shouldn't care about human rights. You shouldn't care about the lives of suspected criminals or drug users. They've been made to believe that. They accepted that because they made a pact with Duterte before that, okay, let's allow him to do that, but in return, he will make this country great. And that is an easy, I would say, gentleman's agreement na pwede nilang pasukan. And that's exactly what happened. Now, Filipinos naman, I think Filipinos in general, are still very, very cognizant of their rights. Except that pag hindi kasi nangyayari sa kanila mismo, they're much more willing to look the other way. Ito nga ang sinasabi natin palagi, hindi dapat tipong dahil nga hindi nangyari sa dahil hindi ikaw ang napatayan, okay lang na mangyari sa kapitbahay mo, okay lang malang mangyari sa ibang tao. And that needs to change. And I don't wish naman na mangyari sa mga Pilipino yung mga nangyari na sa libo-libong mga namatayan sa drug war. No? Kasi, I've been doing this, we've been documenting the drug war. It's a horrific campaign. And you wouldn't wish to see the kind of pain that parents need to endure pag nawalan sila ng anak, pag nawalan ng ama, or nawalan ng mahal sa buhay because pinatay ng police, no? So mahirap sabihin na sana maranasan ito para you care about human rights. No, we're not saying that. I think part of how we can improve as a people is to recognize that other people have the right and that we don't have to suffer from those human rights violations just to appreciate the importance of that human right.
Pero
So how do you counter the message of Rodrigo Duterte that he cares about the rights of the victims of crime more than the criminals? Yun ang lagi yung sinasabi.
Yeah. This needs to be...
How do you counter that kind of argument?
Well, it's to be honest, Amy, that's going to be very, very difficult given the popularity nga ni Mr. Duterte. But we really need to start from the bottom here. We need, and this goes to the human rights community, this goes to the education system, and this goes to the political leaders. We need to popularize human rights. We need to make people care about human rights, civil liberties, and due process. I mean, the mere act, for instance, of not receiving your ayuda during the pandemic in time, that is a human rights violation. Ang problema, maraming nangyayari sa atin na, okay, naghihirap ang mga tao to commute, going to work at 5 o'clock in the morning at para makarating ka sa trabaho mo ng 9 o'clock, 3 hours or 4 hours later, that in itself is a human rights violation. But people don't see it that way because they have not been told that it is a human rights violation. So we tend to take it for granted, but it is a human rights violation. Each time a woman screams that wala na siyang maibigay na gata sa anak niya, that is a human rights violation because the state, the government, has the responsibility to care for its people. Ang problema lang na medyo natabunan ng rhetoric ni Mr. Duterte na ang kailangan lang nating ayusin itong mga droga. Kailangan lang natin patayin itong mga drug dealers at drug users. Medyo natabunan siya nitong mga rhetoric na ganito. But really, when you look at the experience of the Filipino people now in terms of how they live their lives on a daily basis, pwede mong isa-isahin yung mga human rights violations na nararanasan nila. So we need to popularize that. The media, the education system, the political leaders, the human rights community, they need to make this relevant to the ordinary people.
Pero Kaloy, that's the problem nga eh. People are cognizant of their rights. Question is, are they cognizant of the rights of other people? I mean, you talked about that briefly. Parang, I care if it's my rights. Pero yung iba, siguro may kasalanan nga siya, kaya siya nahuli o kaya siya nabaril. Diba? So in the last 6 years, medyo nagbago yung from what I can see, nagbago yung pananaw ng mga tao dun sa issue ng human rights. May mga naging katanggap-tanggap sa maraming tao pagdating sa issue ng human rights. Pati yung pagbakbak sa issue ng human rights.
Kasi nga, meron tayong leader na ganyan ang ginagawa. Dito mo ngayon makikita kung gaano kahalaga yung liderato ang nag-promote ng human rights. So kung ang liderato mismo ang nagsasabi na walang silbi ang human rights, what do you expect? And people really, especially the poor ones, especially those who care about their everyday living, hindi mo naman makakain yung human rights. And that actually is true. As far as they're concerned, that kind of resonates sa kanila. So again, babalik tayo dun sa leaders. Babalik tayo dun sa, hindi lang ito sa presidente na kahit yung sa mga nasa barangay. They're the ones that are responsible in promoting human rights. In the past 6 years, they're the ones that are responsible din sa pag-denigrate ng human rights. Again, parang ano kasi yan parang again, nabanggit ko kanina na pag hindi kasi nangyari sa'yo, you won't care about a human rights violation. No? But again, sana hindi umabot sa ganun. Kasi totoo naman yun na pag hindi nirespeto ng pulis ang human rights mo, one of these days, palang araw, aabot din sa'yo yung violation. So, sabi nga, di ba, may isang kasamasin ba nagsabi nito, Ed, na pumalag ako minsan dahil nireklamo ko na may tawag dito, may nagugutom na tao at tinawag akong komunista at hinuli lahat ng mga komunista. Nung ako na yung, yung siya na yung tinawag na komunista, wala nang natira para ipagtanggol siya. Ganon din yung mangyayari yan sa taong bayan. If they don't care about human rights, and then suddenly, sila ang naging biktima ng human rights violation, and they look around, wala nang matitirang para magtanggol sa kanila. I hope hindi mangyari yon, but nangyari na yon in some ways under Duterte at sana hindi tuloy-tuloy na mangyari.
Okay.
Pahabo lang, Kaloy, pahabo lang. Wala ba kayong nakikitang reason to be positive, at least, about the new administration? For example, among the appointees, particular Clarita Carlos, do you see something there that gives you some hope that the human rights issues that you're wanting to be addressed will be addressed?
Well, to be fair, yung sinabi ni Professor Carlos, National Security Advisor Carlos na against red tagging nga, sinasabi niya hindi dapat ginagawa ito. I mean, that was music to our ears, obviously. And that's music to the ears of the public. Because for the first time, a top-level government official said something that you wouldn't expect na sasagot. Now, while it is music to our ears, well, we were very, very happy to hear that from her. Of course, sabi nga, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We need to see how it goes. And we're not saying na hindi kami optimistic about human rights as far as the government, the Marcos government, all of it is concerned. Meron naman kasing mga individual na appointees na mukha namang may concern din naman, like Professor Carlos, meron yung mga appointees niya, for instance, sinabi nga na sa environment na mukhang mayroong mataas ang credibility sa environment protection. Yung mga ganung bagay, tingin namin, siyempre, optimistic kami doon. Makakabuti yun sa usaping human rights. But again, I think while we want to give this administration the benefit of the doubt, siyempre, because of what happened in the past 6 years, kailangan mong maging guarded din sa yung optimism. Because ang laki-laki, Luchi, ng gagawin pa ng sumusunod na gobyerno to make sure that accountability is achieved. Because that's the one thing. The drug war may end, the human rights violation as we know it in the past 6 years may end, but then the next question na is accountability. Sino ang paparusahan? Just to make sure na hindi na mauulit ito. And so that we can move forward. We're hopeful that will happen under this administration. Kasi whether we like this administration or we like this president or not, the fact is, he's there. He's the one sitting in Malacanang who is going to call the shots. So, even though some of us may think na parang hindi sincere ito, we really wish him the best na gawin niya kung ano yung commitment ng bansa sa human rights.
Okay, maraming salamat, Human Rights Watch Senior Researcher Kaloy Conde. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ami. Thank you, Luchi.
Ingat parate. We are starting up another conversation after a quick break, so please stay right there. You're still watching the Chiefs on One News. The fear is very real for Filipino communities in the U.S. They are helpless targets of hate crimes. How are Filipinos looking out for each other? Father Julian Hagudilla tells us. Father Julian is one of the conveners of the Filipino Americans Network Against Asian Hate. Father Hagudilla, thank you for joining us and welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Father.
Good evening, Father.
Good evening, everyone.
Yes, Father, thank you for joining us all the way there. You're in the East Coast, right? Are you in the East Coast?
Good morning, Father.
Oh, okay, then good morning.
Good morning. Yes.
Good
Good morning, Father.
Father, well, some news of concern. Our Consul General in New York tweeted that there was an elderly Filipina who was verbally harassed by a homeless woman in Queens, New York City. We're wondering, have you heard anything about that? Are there any updates? Have you been able to talk to the woman?
There is no updates. In fact, that's news to me. I haven't reached out to her yet, but incidents like this are very common in New York City.
Oh, they are. Okay, because people tend to think that in New York, it's like a melting pot of sorts, and people are more receptive of of foreigners. I mean, that was the perception of a lot of people.
Well, lately,
You're,
lately
you're referring to attacks on Asians, right? That is pretty common. But we're asking about attacks on Filipinos.
yep. So the latest incident that was reported was an attack on an 18-year-old Filipino tourist
Yes.
who was the son of a former chief of police of Cebu City. But what happened is that when we followed up on the case, they refused to press charges. So that was the thing. But it seems it's a common thing now here in New York City that Asians are being singled out, particularly Filipinos, and we encourage them to report to the police, to network with us, to report the incident to the Philippine consulate. But somehow it's kind of like challenging to work with our community here in New York City for several factors.
Right. Yes. What are the factors, Father?
Number one is hiya. Our kababayans are hiya to report an incident. Of course, they would say something is wrong with them, something is wrong with the situation, why they were singled out, why they were attacked. Secondly, some of them are undocumented. So there's an assumption that because of their immigration status, they don't want to report the incident. But we assured them, and we spoke to the city government and to the state, that if they would report an incident of a racially motivated attack, that their immigration status will not be revealed. And third is that ayun nilang maabala. Okay, they're very busy trying to survive life in the U.S., to support themselves and support their families back in the Philippines. So who has the time to stop working and to focus on, and dealing with this incident? So those are the factors that sometimes we have to work with our people here and say, we can do this together. That's why we created a network, the Filipino-American Network Against Hate Crime. That we're working with different organizations, community-based organizations, and the Philippine Consulate here to spread information, educate, and protect our community.
Father,
Where do you trace the roots of this Asian hate? When did it start? And why do you think, what were the circumstances that allowed it to start to begin with and to, from then on, become more frequent?
Yeah, it really, became apparent and frequent after the then President Trump tagged coronavirus as a Chinese virus, as an Asian virus. So because of that, Asians became target. But we really have to look at Asian hate in a historical perspective, in a historical context. That is, this happened way back then when Asians came to this country. They've been looked down and harassed and intimidated and not welcome here in the States. So there's a long history of anti-Asian hate. But now, because President Trump tagged a coronavirus as an Asian virus or a Chinese virus, here in the U.S., somehow the population can't make a distinction from one Asian to another. For them, anybody that looks Asian is Chinese, and all Asians are Chinese. So whether you're Japanese, you're Indonesian, you're Malaysian, you're Vietnamese, in their eyes, you're Chinese, and so you brought the virus here to the U.S.
So, Father, we notice that at least from news stories that we read, that most of the suspects are, we call them taong grasa or mga bums. At least that's how they're called. In other words, they're not your usual, ordinary civilized citizen. I mean, So I guess what I'm saying is it these people you're referring to who now follow after the logic of Donald Trump that this is an Asian virus or a China virus, and hence we should attack? I mean, that seems to me like a giant leap.
Most of the perpetrators of this crime are homeless people. So, but we cannot make a generalization. We cannot generalize that all these perpetrators are this kind of people. They are not. They just happen to be homeless with struggling with mental illness that the government needs to help. But it's so difficult to peg it down. But I would say most of the perpetrators, especially in big cases, are homeless people.
Although we've read reports about complacency among New Yorkers when they are confronted with these attacks on Asians. Is this a valid observation? It's a valid complaint?
Yes.
Well, of course, the New Yorkers have always had the reputation of, ignoring what's happening with other people. But these are violent attacks. So this is true.
That's true. Of course, here in New York City, people has this mentality to say, mind your own business. Okay, mind your own business. So, but somehow that's good, but it's also good because when something tragic or violent happened to somebody, nobody stepped up. For example, we had two celebrated cases. One was the case of Noel Quintana, who was slashed in the face from his ear to ear, from one ear to the other.
Yes.
While that incident happened in the subway, he screamed for help. Nobody came forward to help him. The case of Bill McCary, who was kicked and stomped on the ground.
Yes.
Okay, nobody came to her rescue.
They closed the door.
We also saw in the footages that the doorman of the hotel where it happened closed the door.
Yes.
So again, I would say mind your own business, but I think in this context we need to do more. We need to come to the rescue of people who are being victimized. But I think, of course, when you cross that line to help somebody, you're putting yourself in danger.
Yeah.
That's why when people would intervene, they should not intervene alone. There should be a group of you to intervene in this situation. But that has been happening now, that when people would come forward and help.
So how is this affecting the lifestyle of Filipinos and Asians in general, in New York in particular? Because there are so many violent attacks in the city.
We're scared, especially the older ones. They don't want to venture out of their homes alone. Filipinos, especially, and Asians in general, learn to protect themselves. We've been hosting self-defense trainings, de-escalation trainings, and other trainings to protect ourselves. And some of us have been carrying pepper spray.
Pepper spray, not guns.
Yeah, not guns, no guns here in New York City. And then, and some, of course, advice had been, don't travel by yourself. The same thing with tourists. New York City is a safe place as long as you are aware of your surroundings, as long as you know to protect yourself, as long as you're not traveling by yourself. And of course, there are many Filipinos here who would, come to your rescue, help you when something happens to you.
Father, I'd like to
Going
go
back to New Yorkers' reactions, are they? Are they even showing any sympathy on the whole in regard to Asian hate crimes? Are they expressing the thing as deplorable? Are they supporting you in any way in your fight against it?
They're supportive, there is sympathy, but the question is, are they willing to risk their lives when they intervene? Let's say when somebody get attacked, will one person intervene and stop the attack? Most of the time, that person will be in danger. But if there's a group of 3 or 4 who would come forward and confront the attacker, of course, that situation is mitigated.
No, I mean in terms of say advocacy groups or support groups, are there New Yorkers who are actually supporting you or expressing at least their anger over these hate crimes, maybe in media or elsewhere?
Yes, yes. New Yorkers are very supportive in this regard. It's because New York City is, well, I hate to say this, it's a democratic state and city. People are very aware and very, they're into advocacy into a lot of issues, including anti-Asian hate, immigration, and the like.
Father, I'd like
So
to go
there's
back
a lot
to
of organizing and movements here in New York City.
Father, I'd like to go back to something you mentioned a while ago. There's been an increase in cases there of hate crimes. I do understand what you were saying. In part, it was because of Trump's rhetoric that helped to inspire this. But that's, Trump has been gone for 2 years already. What could be the reason for the increases at this point where you have a president who's a Democrat in New York City pa?
Yeah, but even though Trump is done, is finished with his term, there's that thinking in general, in the public in general, that this is a virus brought by the Chinese to the U.S. But also part of it also is the way they look at Asians, that we are easy targets, we are not assertive, we won't speak out. For example, the elderly Asian whose English is not the first language, we're not easily able to speak up for himself, And there's a mentality, a docile mentality with us Asians, We don't want to call attention to ourselves, we don't want to rock the boat, etc., etc. So, yeah, there it is.
How would you describe the police response when complaints are filed?
When you file a complaint, it has to be well established. So one of the initiatives that will be leading soon, that is FUN is going to lead soon, will be a conversation with Asian American lawyers to help us understand anti-discrimination laws, because somehow it doesn't apply to us. Or its implementation, rather, let me correct myself, its implementation is not equal. So when you report an incident, it has to be well established. We cannot call all these incidents as racial crimes. We can say like hate, racially motivated crimes, but it's very hard to classify it as a hate, racial crime.
If it's a hate crime, the penalty is heavier, right? More than if it's just a common physical injury case?
Well, if it is a racial crime, it's different. I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot expound more on that. But I'm sure racially motivated crimes has a corresponding, heavier punishment.
And what about in other states? Are you hearing the same kind of incidents of hate crimes? And in what particular states would this be as frequent as in New York?
Okay, in terms of frequency, it's only in the East and West Coast that these incidents happen. But we also have to be reminded that these incidents are underreported. We're not in the habit of documenting or reporting, because in our minds alone, Asians in general, it's not part of, anti-discrimination or racism is not part of our psyche.
Yeah.
We kind of we have to pause and say, was it a racial remark? Was it a racial slur? We know and we feel that it hurts. We can feel and we can decipher that we are being discriminated, but somehow we have to stop and say, what was it all about? You know why? Because it's not part of our everyday language and thinking, So we have to pause and stop. But again, frequency, it's very hard to capture the data because it's underreported. Like there's a few that I've spoken to and said, for example, they were attacked in the subway and said, why don't you report it? You know what? Their reaction was, Father, nahihiya ako kasi pag nasa news ako, malalaman ng pamilya ko sa Pilipinas na inatake ako dito. So how would you change the thing?
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
You can only console them and help them and say that we are here, we're a community, we are here to support one another. You know, we are not an ideal.
So there's no, yeah. So there's no movement to come together and, you know, as one organization, Filipinos or Asians, just take a stand and be more, well, vigilant and militant about it even. Walang
Yep.
ganon.
There are many organizations.
Yes, Asian.
When it comes to the Filipinos, we have lots of organizations. But that's why we created FANA as a network that would represent and deal with this one particular issue, anti-Asian hate, particularly with the Filipinos.
Well, apart from violent attacks, are you getting reports of other cases of other types of discrimination against Filipinos? Is there an increase as well?
Yeah, in terms of like verbal attacks, yes.
Yeah.
There is. So somebody was spot on the other day, as you mentioned,
Yes.
by somebody, a Filipina. So when an incident happens, the Philippine consulate here in New York City is very quick to investigate and find out if the victim is a Filipino or not. If it's a Filipino, then they're very, very helpful.
Okay.
Right.
Father Julian Hagodilla of the conveners of conveners Filipino Americans Network Against Asian Hate. Father, magandang umaga at salamat sa iyong pagdalo sa amin dito.
Good morning, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father. And that's it for the Chiefs. We hope to discuss here. We'll keep the conversation going. I'm Ed Lingao.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.